We're going to give y'all just a minute to get seated. We're putting extra chairs out, a problem we love to have. All right. I think just about everybody has a seat now, and we are thrilled to have you all here with us. I am Katie Blount, Director of the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. Welcome to the two Mississippi museums. Just a minute ago, Reena Evers-Everette and Pamela Jr. each separately gave me the same directive, and I always do what Reena Evers-Everette and Pamela Jr. tell me to do, and they said, tell them to silence their cell phones. So please silence your cell phones. Thank you. Welcome to the 5th Medgar Wiley Evers Lecture. While this series is young, it is already very distinguished. The inaugural speaker was Professor Manning Marable of Columbia University. In 2014, civil rights hero Dr. Robert Moses gave an unforgettable talk at the Old Capitol to commemorate Freedom Summer. In 2015, we were honored to welcome Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. of Harvard University. And in 2018, not long after we opened the two Mississippi museums, we heard a wonderful talk by Lonnie Bunch, who was then the first director of the National Museum of African American History and Culture and is, of course, now Secretary of the Smithsonian Institution. Tonight, we are thrilled to welcome Dr. Eddie Glaude of Princeton University. Dr. Glaude from Moss Point is the first native Mississippian Evers lecturer. Welcome home. I hear you had a delicious fried fish sandwich for lunch. Thanks to COVID, this is the third time we have scheduled this lecture, and many people have mentioned that to me tonight. We've waited 3 years, and we have. I want to thank Dr. Glaude for his patience and flexibility. I want to thank Brother Rogers and Michael Morris on our staff for making this happen. And we are delighted to actually be here tonight for an event that was well worth waiting for. I'm not going to recognize very many people in this distinguished crowd, but I do want to recognize Mr. James Meredith. Would you please stand? We're honored to have you here, as well as other veterans of the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement. We appreciate you all. I would like to thank the Kellogg Foundation, whose generous and early support helped us build these museums and endow the Medgar Evers Lecture Series that is so important to us. They have been friends to us in so many ways and visionary leaders here in Mississippi and nationally. With us tonight, my friend and partner, Rhea Bishop. Please stand. I know we have a number of elected officials with us tonight, both local and state level. Please know how much we appreciate your leadership and your support for this department. Thank you. We have our board president, Spence Flatgard, and we have members of our Foundation for Mississippi History Board. I know I saw Dr. McLemore. Thank you for your leadership of this department. Finally, I would like to recognize Reena Evers-Everette, Executive Director of the Medgar and Myrlie Evers Institute. And other representatives of the Evers family and of the Evers Institute. Please stand. Thank you. Nearly 20 years ago, Myrlie Evers, who is much on my mind tonight, made an extraordinary gift to the people of Mississippi when she presented the papers, her own papers, and those of her late husband, Medgar Evers, to the Department of Archives and History. Needless to say, this is one of the most significant civil rights collections in the country. It is one of the most significant collections that we have in our care. It was an incredibly generous gift and an important sign that this department was changing in ways that it needed to change. She and Reena and the Evers family have remained close friends, strong partners, and we are very, very grateful for their friendship and partnership and for the outstanding work of the Medgar and Myrlie Evers Institute. I'm honored to introduce my friend Reena Evers-Everette, who flew back from California. Was it the red eye? Ooh. To be here with us tonight. Reena, do you want to say a few words? And then following Reena's remarks, Two Mississippi Museums Director Pamela Jr. will introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Wow. Good evening. And welcome. As bestie friends Katie Blount has already stated, it is the fifth Evers Lecture Series. And so much of what Katie has already stated, I'm just going to restate a little bit because it's important. And the importance is that this is actually happening, and that the Evers Lecture Series is about social justice. It's about civic movement and engagement, and those who are doing it on the ground. And so we have another foot soldier that is going to present with us this evening. But first, I'd like to thank again the W.K. Kellogg Foundation for being such a strong supporter of us for years and continued support in this program and others. Rhea, please thank you and stand again because you and Kellogg have been phenomenal. What can I say about MDAH? Katie Blount, our late Governor Winter, was really the ones who forged this partnership and union. It is a union, truly. And it is one that I think will transcend all generations. That's what our hope is. And that will make activists of all that attend in any that we do. And talking about activists, and I know that my wonderful friend, James Meredith, who's a family friend, been recognized, but can I ask all the civil rights veterans and foot soldiers to please stand up and be recognized? We do this because of you. Because of you, you've given us the strength, the fortitude, the wisdom to move forward and to tell the tales. I have to, not because they twisted my arm, but I have to thank my wonderful family. And I say that because I get twisted eyes going at me when I do that. But they have always been there for us, always. And I just love you all, and I thank you for family true support. But you know, there's one person that's not here presently that has been spoken of already, and that's my mother, Myrlie Evers Williams. And without her, this would have never happened. Without her, 30-plus years of justice would never happen in our family. As I left her yesterday, late yesterday, she said to me, "You're going home?" I said, "Yep, I'm going home." And she said, "Tell them all hi." And she hopes one day, she said, maybe next year, hopes one day to see you all in person. But in the meantime, as she said, carry on with the movement of equality and justice. These past 2 years have been challenging for all of us on all different levels of life. And our guest lecturer, Dr. Eddie Glaude Jr., understands challenges. He evaluates those challenges. And in his book, Democracy in Black, How Race Still Enslaves the American Soul, is a remarkable testimony of how America is still grappling with race and equality. Dr. Glaude coined the term, and I hope that's correct, value gap in his book, which essentially means that a sector of the human race has more value or status than others in America. The devaluation of our lives has become an ongoing systemic disease in our society, historically and currently. But I can't help thinking about all the veterans that are sitting here right now, all the veterans who have already passed, whether it was due violence or natural causes. I think about their work and how tirelessly they kept moving forward. And what they did to hold this country accountable for the standards of democracy that was put forth. Our guest speaker, his just wonderful tone and deliverance that he does. And I'm doing that because I'm really a fan, but I didn't tell you that because I was embarrassed. Is sorely needed today to remind us all that the continued devaluation of lives in this country, what happens with voter suppression, what happens with states that's passing laws to punish protesters, and the systemic attempt to not learn about our shared history, not for just those that are here, but for future generations. We at the Medgar and Myrlie Evers Institute applaud scholars and activists like Dr. Glaude, who speak truth to power at every opportunity, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's on TV, whether it's in his books, or whether it's in the neighborhood. He does not mince words and calls our country to the table for accountability. The Medgar and Myrlie Evers Institute is here to continue the mission of its namesakes, and those who did the same and worked for all of us. But it's my esteemed pleasure to welcome, I guess that's Pamela Jr.'s part, but it's still my esteemed pleasure to have you present with us tonight, Dr. Eddie S. Glaude Jr., because it was your first steps on this soil of Mississippi that soaked up all the richness of your family, gave you the wisdom, the integrity, and the fortitude to move everything forward as you have done. And so we need your truth to remind us of who we are, what we have become, and where we need to go. And with that, Ms. Pamela Jr.
Before I get started, I had Dr. Glaude laughing, or Eddie, as he's told me to call him, because I told him that all of his booze would be in the house today, and some of them in the back. I showed him, I didn't get a chance to show him the Facebook page and how all these women were saying, and I'm not going to look that way at them, because I don't want them to see, and I'm not going to embarrass you or them, but the booze are in the house. It is with great pleasure and my privilege to introduce one of the nation's most prominent scholars, Dr. Eddie S. Glaude Jr., to deliver the Medgar Wiley Evers Lecture. A native of Moss Point, Mississippi, Dr. Glaude is a passionate educator, author, political commentator, and public intellectual. He is a James S. McDonnell Distinguished University Professor and Chair of the Department of African American Studies at Princeton University. A highly accomplished and respected scholar of religion, Dr. Glaude is a former president of the American Academy of Religion. While he is an award-winning teacher at Princeton, where he earned his PhD, he would want me to mention that he is a 1989 graduate of the House. Mr. Deese is over there, wave your hand. All the time. Where he was student government president and now serves on the College Board of Trustees. And he is a member of the Gamma Nu chapter of Kappa Alpha Phi fraternity. His latest book, Began Again, James Baldwin's America and its urgent lessons for our own, take an honest look at race in America today. Dr. Glaude frequently appears in the media as a columnist for Time magazine and as an MSNBC contributor on programs like Morning Joe and Deadline White House with Nicole Wallace. You also may have seen him on Fox News, CNN, or C-SPAN. He also regularly appears on Meet the Press on Sundays. Dr. Glaude has a scholar's knowledge of history and an activist passion for social justice. He is a shrewd, a thoughtful, and sometimes provocative observer of events in our country today. Before I take my seat, I'd like to read just a small paragraph from the book Begin Again, where Dr. Glaude takes a quote from the magnificent James Baldwin, where he speaks about salvation and love. There is absolutely no salvation without love. This is the wheel in the middle of a wheel. Salvation does not divide, salvation connects. It is not the exclusive property of any dogma, creed, or church. It keeps the channel open between oneself and however one wishes to name that which is greater than oneself. It has nothing to do with one's fortune or one's circumstances in one's passage through this world. It is a mighty fortress, even in the teeth of ruin, or at the gates of death. We are in for a treat tonight. Let's give this soul, Dr. Eddie Glaude, with roots from the soil of Mississippi, a great welcome.
Thank you. I'm trying not to lose it. Thank you, Ms. Pam, for that gracious introduction and for leading me through the journey that is this wonderful museum. I'm still, in some ways, processing what I experienced. Thank you, Sister Katie, for your leadership and your commitment to what we're doing here, what we need to do in Mississippi. Thank you, Sister Reena. That hug carried with it something that is ancestral. It's a kind of fortifying hug in times in which you need it, which I needed. Thank you. Brother Rogers and Brother Michael, thank you. Brother Rogers has been hunting me down for the last 4 or 5 years. I appreciate you, Doc. And Brother Michael, thank you for seeing in me something that I see in your eyes. Thank you. I appreciate you, brother. I want to thank Brother James Meredith for everything that you've done. I'm always kind of on the verge of collapse when I meet giants who made me possible. One time I scared Hollis Watkins. He was at Princeton with Bob Moses, and I started crying. He was like, "What's wrong with this Negro?" It was funny. But I'm from Moss Point, Mississippi, y'all. Thank you. And the idea that I'm here giving the Medgar Wiley Evers Lectures just blows my mind. The idea that I'm the recipient of the words of Myrlie Evers just blows my mind, and I'm trying to put it together. But as a black preacher of sorts, I know we only have a certain amount of time, right? I'm going to try to get through this. I'm a text preacher, even though I'm not a preacher at all. So I probably won't get through all of this because I want to be respectful of your time. I'm going to begin with 2 quotes. One is from W. Ralph Eubanks' wonderful book, A Place Like Mississippi, a journey through a real and imagined literary landscape. He says, "It is the beauty of the land mixed with the state's complex history that inspires and perplexes its writers. That is the burden one feels when writing about Mississippi, because it is a place that everyone knows about, or at least claims to, yet few are willing to understand." The next quotation from Melville's Moby Dick. "But not yet have we solved the incantation of this whiteness and learned why it appeals with such power to the soul, and more strange and far more pretentious, why, as we have seen, it is at once the most meaningful symbol of spiritual things, and yet should be, as it is, the intensifying agent in things the most appalling to mankind." I'm so honored to be here with you today to deliver this particular lecture in this specific place. Like many, I have an incredibly vexed relationship to my home state. I claim Mississippi wherever I go. I am, after all, a country boy from the coast. I grew up with the smells of the porgy plant and the paper mill, mixed in with the autumn air. For much of my childhood, I associated school with the pungent odor that greeted you on an early September morning, salted and rotten, deposited on the back of your tongue. I loved the fried fish and shrimp on Fridays. Blues all day Saturday on the radio. I'm a huge Bobby Blue Bland fan. Mississippi is home. But I left the state. I ran away, really, when I was 16 years old. Of course, there was this incredibly difficult relationship with my father. He scared the hell out of me and put fear in my gut, and I've been trying to prove that I'm not a coward ever since I left home. What I remember most about home are the silences, the unspoken words that screamed that something wasn't quite right, the space between people who loved hard but didn't say much about themselves or about the world that shaped them. Mystery and wound mingled. Children had to make do with the storm of emotions that came with it all. I know I did. And I think this is something the poet Natasha Trethewey, another Mississippian, captures in her work, even in the way the empty space works on the page of Memorial Drive. She writes, "These are things which must be accounted for. Slaughter under the white flag of surrender, black massacre at Fort Pillow, our new name, the Corps d'Afrique. Words that take the native from our claim, mossbacks and freedmen, exiles in the own homeland, the diseased, the maimed, every last limb, and what remains, phantom ache, memory haunting an empty sleeve. The hog eaten at Gettysburg, unmarked in their graves, all the dead letters unanswered, untold stories of those that time will render mute. Beneath the battlefields, green again, the dead molder, a scaffolding of bone we tread upon, forgetting, truth be told." End quote. Now, certainly Ralph Eubanks gets it right when he says, to find a good Mississippi story, quote, explore the silences. For it is within the parts of our history we have chosen to shroud in silence in which our best stories reside. And of course, pain and beauty are deeply entangled there like coral snakes in a mating ball. The silences weren't just at home, they were at school. I didn't learn much about the sordid past of Mississippi at Mossbourne High School. I knew generally what happened and how our state stood out among other southern states, but the particulars escaped me. My parents didn't talk about it much, and the teachers didn't really teach it. My 8th grade history teacher, Miss Mitchell, taught a brief section on the Civil Rights Movement. I remember memorizing Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech and performing it for the class, and she asked me to recite the speech for the other class, but my closest friend, Steve Richmond, was in that class. I was a bit distracted, as you can imagine, as 8th grade boys are wont to be. During my sophomore year in high school, I'm getting somewhere, walk with me. The year before I ran away from home, I worked as a page at the Pascagoula Regional Library. I was shelving books on Saturday afternoon. I asked my mother, can I get a job at Ingalls? She said, "You're not going to embarrass me with your lazy behind." She said, "I was born to push a pencil." She was so right. But I was shelving books on Saturday afternoon, and I came across this interesting title. Ironically, it was Manning Marable's Race, Reform, and Rebellion, the Second Reconstruction in Black America, published by the University Press of Mississippi. I devoured that book. I won't tell you that I stole it, and it's still in my library. This was my first introduction. This was my first introduction to Medgar Evers beyond a name. How he was shot down in the front of his home for us and for me. I would come to know much later, so much more about the struggle for freedom in Mississippi, about the ordinary people who dared to do extraordinary things. Reading that book between the shelves of the library became part of my primal scene of instruction. There, my obsession with history was born. I felt in my bones, as much as I loved this place, this state, that I was out of place, or more accurately, that I didn't know my place. And I've been trying to figure that out ever since. And perhaps history contains the answer. Eubanks writes that every Mississippi feels in some way that the past can never be escaped. I completely agree, and the insight is so desperately needed today in this country where the ghosts of the past have us all by the throat. We still live in a society where some among us believe that this country must remain a white nation in the vein of old Europe, where the stock assumptions about black people continue to circulate. That view with greed, along with greed and selfishness, is at the heart of what is happening today. It is at the heart of the ongoing efforts to disenfranchise people of color. It's happening in the debates about our national history around the 1619 Project and critical race theory. Here we are in 2022, still grappling with the idea that this country can be, ought to be, in fact is, a multiracial democracy. And still fighting over the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. I'm reminded of the formulation by Ralph Ellison, the author of The Invisible Man. America has yet to discover itself. We are lost, as so it seems, in our comforting illusions in the world of make-believe that secures our innocence. The crisis we face today calls into question a wide range of practices and assumptions about who we are as a country and who can lay claim to the benefits and burdens of citizenship. We have experienced what I have described as a racial reckoning, and now we face the betrayal of it all. In real time, as the innocents, to echo Henry James, decry substantive change, as they retreat into the comforts of their caves to ponder shadows. James Baldwin was right. The horror, quote, is that America changes all the time without ever changing at all. Oh, I come to tell you the truth. Now, to my mind, I'm not going to talk all day, but I might. Now, to my mind, any consideration of the stakes of racial justice in the future of American democracy requires that we venture to the heart of the matter. It is an occasion to examine the deep contradictions that shaped and continue to shape this country, a contradiction rooted like the tangled knots of an old Mississippi oak. In this idea that white people ought to matter more than others, and the lies we tell to protect ourselves from the ghastly implications of it all. It is hard to admit for some, but I must say it now, that the American idea is in trouble. In fact, it has been in some form of trouble the moment it was given shape and texture. We tell ourselves that we are an example of democracy achieved, that we are the shining city on the hill, but these stories aim to conceal the contradiction at the heart of this fragile experiment in democracy. Let me reach for Baldwin again. In 1964, he wrote, quote, "The people who settled the country had a fatal flaw. They could recognize a man when they saw one. They knew he wasn't anything else but a man. But since they were Christian and since they had already decided that they came here to establish a free country, the only way to justify the role this chattel was playing in one's life was to say that he was not a man. For if he wasn't," Baldwin writes, "then no crime would have been committed." And then he says this, "That lie is the basis of our present trouble," end quote. We know this country has been and continues to be a place where the value gap affects the distribution of advantage and disadvantage, that we have created a way of life where some are valued and have standing, while others must experience what philosophers describe as a generalized sense of disregard. We know this. We know that government policy in the post-World War II, at every point, for example, our history betrays us. Government policy in the post-World War II era gave birth to the vaunted American middle class. And we know that African Americans were systematically locked out of the benefits of those policies. We act as if there wasn't a dual housing market. We act as if there wasn't a dual labor market. We act as if there weren't banking policies that established rent lines and the like. We understand that the wealth gap didn't happen because black folk can't save money. We know schools were segregated. We know residential neighborhoods were segregated. We built the country true. Y'all didn't know I talked like this, did you? We know there's a different form of policing in this country. And all we have to do is to think about what happened January 6th. We have too long told ourselves a story that secures our virtue and protects us from our vices. But I'm a reader of Nietzsche. You have to cultivate your vice in order to cultivate your virtue, you know. Today we confront the ugliness of who we are, y'all. Millions of Americans feel that the country has turned its back on them, that the browning of America represents decline. And some among them attempted to sack the Capitol because they believed the election was stolen, that they believed that only white votes matter. Much of this was fueled by resentment and grievance and white fear. January 6th was a moment when the cold civil war in this country turned hot. And we heard either that night or the next day, I can't remember, an echo of the past on the Senate floor. Senator Ted Cruz, my favorite senator. I'm gonna have to run out of Mississippi. Senator Ted Cruz, on the floor of the Senate, invoked the presidential election of 1876 as a framework to settle the dispute around the certification of the election. And he invoked the Compromise of 1877 against the backdrop of an insurrection that left shit on the walls of the U.S. Capitol. History reveals itself here not as determination, but as a kind of inheritance, not as continuity, but as connection and relation, where one event echoes or carries the imprint of another and calls it all into view. Historical facts and personalities don't simply appear twice, but in multiple forms and ways, like a blurred image with layers and depth that interrupt, intercede, folds back, and calls forth. All that's a bit abstract. The simple point is that we've been here before. In similar moments of trouble, we have had a chance, when we've had a chance to imagine America anew, in those moments when the contradiction seized the American heart, we have witnessed over and over again the reassertion of the value gap and the lies that provided cover. So all we need to do is think about the Civil War and radical Reconstruction. What did we get in response to the second founding of the U.S. nation state? What did we get in response to the Civil War amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments? We got Jim Crow. Frederick Douglass would live long enough to see Abraham Lincoln not only sign the Emancipation Proclamation, the 13th Amendment ratified, he would live long enough to see the state of Mississippi pass Jim Crow laws. He would call them the apostles of forgetfulness. What else did we see? We saw convict leasing, another form of slavery, where the state deployed police to conscript black labor to help build cities like Birmingham, Alabama. What else did we see? We saw the ideology of Anglo-Saxonism justify America's imperial ambition across the global South. At the very moment in which we're consolidating the racial regime of Jim Crow in the South, we're annexing millions of people of color under U.S. rule. Baseball isn't just our only export. And remember, Anglo-Saxonism is not the possession of the South. As Malcolm said, as long as you're south of the Canadian border, you in the South. All too often, the South is made to bear the burdens of the nation's sins. What else did we see in this moment? In this moment, at a moment when we were trying to, in some ways, found a genuinely multiracial democracy, we doubled down on the belief that only certain people, because of the color of their skin, ought to be valued, and others generally disregarded. Think about the mid-20th century, the black freedom struggle. Think about what you did, Mr. Meredith. Historians refer to this period as the second Reconstruction. Marable returns. It was an attempt to fulfill the broken promises of the first. I'm worried about my time, y'all. What did we get in response? We got the election of Richard Nixon twice. Twice. We got calls for law and order. It wasn't just simply a Republican affair. That can be traced back to the Kerner Commission report and what they implemented. We got the tax revolt in California, which shredded the social safety net of the New Deal. As we began to argue for integration, many folk, you know this in Mississippi, instead of engaging in integration, they engaged in abdication. If we're going to integrate the pools, we're going to leave and we're going to found our own private swimming clubs. If you're going to integrate the schools, we're going to what? We're going to found our own seg schools. Don't we have a senator or something like that? And then complain about our tax dollars being used to pay for public goods. Oh, y'all didn't hear me. At every turn. And then by 1980, just 15 years after the passage of the Voting Rights Act, Ronald Reagan was elected to undo it all. And let's be clear, I know this is a controversial claim. Reagan was as notorious among some activists as George Wallace. In 1981, Sister Reena, in 1981, Reagan agreed to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act after some trepidation. But he said it needed to be amended. And what did he say needed to be amended? He said that Section 5 needed to be removed. Shelby V. Holder did it for him in 2013. And now we're fighting for voting rights right now. At every turn when a new America is about to be born, the umbilical cord of white supremacy has been wrapped around the baby's neck, choking the life out of it. We have to be better midwives. Ours is a moment in which many are running away from history. We prefer our illusion straight, no chaser. Safety is found in the stories that tell us that America is an example of democracy achieved. But there's a different story, a darker reality that haunts this place. It's one drenched in blood and tears. Unimaginable horror resides there. Trauma passed on from generation to generation, and it is soaked in the soil of this country, especially here in Mississippi, where the landscape is often filled with monuments to that violence. Bridges where strange fruit dangled. Places in the center of town that bear the markings of human sacrifice. In her brilliant novel, Sing, Unburied Sing, Jessamine Ward, another Mississippian, captures the haunting consequences of those who didn't die right because of it all. A story of the revenant that shadows our days. Quote, "The branches are full. They're full with ghosts. 2 or 3 all the way up to the top, to the feathered leaves. There are women and men and boys and girls, some of them near to babies. They crouch looking at me. Black and brown and closest near babies, smoke white. None of them reveal their deaths, but I see it in their eyes, their great black eyes. They perch like birds, but look as people. They speak with their eyes. He raped me and suffocated me until I died. I put my hands up and he shot me 8 times. She locked me in the shed and starved me to death while I listened to my babies playing with her in the yard. They came in my cell in the middle of the night and they hung me. They found out I could read and they dragged me out to the barn and gouged my eyes before they beat me still. I was sick and he said I was an abomination, and Jesus said, suffer little children, so let her go. He put me under the water and I couldn't breathe. Eyes blink as the sun blazes and winks below the forest line so that ghosts catch the color, reflect the red. The sun making scarlet plumage of the clothes they wear, rags and breeches, t-shirts and tignons, fedoras and hoodies, end quote. This is the haunting and terror of history. This is an echo of Toni Morrison's rewriting of the Middle Passage in a different register, in a different time. History matters because we carry it within us. And Mississippi is soaked in history. And as James Baldwin wrote, it is in great pain and terror that one begins to assess that history, which has placed one where one is and formed one's point of view, because one enters into battle with that historical creation oneself. These museums matter precisely because they force an encounter with who we really are. It is difficult to acknowledge that the ghosts continue to haunt. It is difficult to imagine the consequences of America's violence and the lives crushed because of it. We can't talk about the Mississippi movement without necessarily encountering the violence of this place and the courage of those who faced it. Lives crushed because of it. People who don't want to confront how the trauma of racial violence shaped and shapes one's life. How it impacts the way you navigate space and time. The fear for loved ones, the silence around what happened, the trauma that would then guide how you rear your children, walk the roads of this place, how you even dream. And narrative trauma often fragments how we remember. We recall what we can and what we desperately need to keep ourselves together. Wounds threaten to rend the soul. And if that happens, nothing else matters. We cannot survive. But telling the story of trauma in fits and starts isn't history in any formal sense. It is the way traumatic memory works. As Toni Morrison put it, recollections caught in the pitched battle between forgetting and remembering. Some stories, she wrote, are not meant to pass on, but we carry them forward in the marrow of our bones. We try to keep our heads above water and tell ourselves a story that keeps our legs and arms moving below the surface. What did William Faulkner tell us in Requiem of a Nun? The past is never dead. The past is not even past. Now, politics can't settle any of this. I often worry that we are too willing to trade one fantasy for another, that only if we elect certain folk, we would be okay. You believe that? I got an affordable flat in Brooklyn to sell you. Presidential or congressional elections alone do not answer the question of who we take ourselves to be. The answer to that question is a moral as well as political question, and it will only emerge in what we do now. Will we finally confront our past and leave behind this insidious idea of white America? Can we finally give up this idea of America that requires the image of the old Negro? This image of me firmly fixed in a subordinate place. Baldwin said that the country will not change until it re-examines and discovers what it really means by freedom. And if we are to do that, he said we have to crack the American image. Listen at that language. Crack the American image and find out and deal with what it hides. But it's difficult for us to do that because he said Americans live by lies. See, I know this is hard. We think the big lie is new. No, it ain't. It's just the latest instance. We evade reality in this country because we are afraid to reveal ourselves because we trust ourselves so little. We've never been a beacon of virtue. America is not an example of democracy achieved, nor are we the shining city on the hill, but to admit that is not to condemn us to the gallows. It's no different than admitting that you're a sinner. That admission becomes the condition for the possibility for you to be saved. Y'all didn't hear me. We're trapped in a history we refuse to know but carry within us. I'm trying to bring it home, y'all. And Baldwin says this is the root of our unadmitted sorrow. The terrors and panic we experience have everything to do with the gap between who we imagine ourselves to be and who deep down we really are. And the fact that we evade that question locks us into a kind of perpetual adolescence. This is what the late June Jordan described as this American habit of genteel make-believe. We have to ask ourselves the hard question of how will we put ourselves in touch with reality? Mississippi. We have to describe us to ourselves, as Baldwin put it, as we now are, and to borrow a phrase from Henry James, we have to do so at the pitch of passion. If we figure this out, if we answer the riddle of the Sphinx, we will liberate the country. If we figure it out, and silences are our best stories. I recall a conversation, and I'm coming to a close, I promise, with the late Bob Moses, and just mentioning his name calls up tears. But he told me about the revolutionary work of SNCC in Mississippi. He said it was not simply to dismantle Jim Crow, but principally who they brought into the political process. He told me of the story of SNCC field secretaries in a federal courtroom in Greenwood, Mississippi, quote, packed with black sharecroppers, hushed along its walls, packed onto its benches, and attending to the question put by a federal district judge, Clayton, why is SNCC taking illiterates down to register to vote? Bob said those illiterate black sharecroppers brought with them to the courthouse and to the ballot box a wealth of experience that shaped their demands of the state, informed their embrace of democratic ideals, and expanded, if only for a moment, our very understanding of who we take ourselves to be. I come from a tradition that offers a story of the country that forces it to confront its ugliness, to in fact urge the country to grow the hell up. We have to live close to the ground if we're going to change. We have to understand the power of everyday ordinary people to imagine a better future. We have to tell ourselves the truth in order to release us into a different way of being in the world. We got to tell the truth to Governor Ted Reeves. Tell the truth to Joe Biden. As long as we view racial equality as a philanthropic enterprise, as long as we view racial justice as an act of charity, we're in trouble still. In the end, and I'm done, some of y'all been to Baptist churches, I see. In the end, we have to live into a different way of being together in Mississippi, in the United States. It is in the going towards, Miss Pam, it is in the going towards that our salvation is to be found. Not in the wake, but in the going towards. We have to fight for the future right now. And that means committing ourselves to building a country, building a state close to the ground that affirms the dignity and sacrality of every human being, no matter the color of their skin, their zip code, or where they're from, who they love, their gender or ability. It must involve a revolution of value, a shift in who and what we value. And in order for this to happen, we will have to tell ourselves the truth about our failures, and we will have to take the risk to do something bold and visionary. I am a child of Mississippi. No more need to run away. Grown up now. I have a better sense of my place these days. And the grandness of the tradition out of which I come have helped me understand that. And I'm reminded now of an interview with Medgar Evers published in Ebony magazine in November of 1958. As he faced down the barbarism of this place, he said something that struck me when I was a young man and strikes me now as age asserts itself. Quote, you know, he said, it may sound funny, but I love the South. I didn't choose to live anywhere else. There's land here where a man can raise cattle, and I'm going to do that someday, where there are lakes where a man can sink a hook and fight the bass. There's room here for my children to play and grow and become good citizens, he said, but I'll be damned if I'm going to let the white man lick me. There's something out here that I've got to do for my kids, and I'm not going to stop until I've done it, end quote. I too love the South. I love Mississippi. And whatever it is, whatever this state is here, whatever makes this place what it is deep in the marrow of my bone. This is a place where one can grow, but the ghost of the past haunt. Natasha Traithaway, here, the rivers crawl toward the Gulf. In my dream, the ghost of history lies down beside me, rolls over, pins me beneath a heavy arm. True freedom for all of us requires that we confront the ghost of our past directly. Tell a different story about how we arrived here at the vestibule, desperately trying to get on the other side of this story. Tell the ghost to go on and rest now. We got this. All of which requires that we work even harder for a better world, that we put aside the old fears and terrors and the histories that justify them in order to finally bury this idea of the old Negro and the white people who so desperately need him. Take care, y'all. Thank you.
Powerful. Is this on? I think it is now. Yes. You know, it almost makes you want to dance. You know? You just get that Holy Ghost spirit in you when you hear the preacher preach. And we are so lucky to take this opportunity to do a question and answer. And what we would love is to hear from all of you, not all tonight, but we would like to have some questions. But I'm going to ask you if when you get the microphone, that you stand up and that you say your name, and I'm now channeling my mother, very distinctively. I did. Well, no, I'm not going to go there. And then ask your question to our wonderful guest lecturer and our family member, Eddie Glaude. We're going to start out with a couple of them, but think, please. I'm sure you have lots, but think, please. You've answered these questions, actually, but I want you to think about it again. Growing up in Mississippi, what values impacted you the most from here? And any memories that you can attach to it is good.
I'll tell it by way of a story. First of all, I know I talk long. Y'all have been patient with me. I appreciate you. I know we're going a little over time. But thank you for sticking with us. When I was in the fourth grade at West Elementary School, I thought the teacher was singling me out. And I jumped up and I screamed, "You are a racist," and I ran out of the room. I thought I was going to get killed by my dad. He could look at me and I would get scared. And I remember him saying, "Come here." I don't want to tell y'all what my nickname was.
Oh, you opened it up, man.
Yeah. There were two, but I ain't going to say it. Right. Come here. What did she say? If anybody ever talks to you like that again, you do the same damn thing. And the second time was I won the youth governorship of Mississippi. I was the first black youth governor of the YMCA student legislature. And, you know, I was supposed to be like, I was supposed to win by a landslide, but I barely won. And, you know, I remember the buses coming in with all the lights on Moss Point, you know, this is a big deal, you know. Moss Point, the black labor of the city of Pascagoula, you know. You know, Pascagoula was sued for environmental racism because he was dumping all of his toxic waste in Moss Point, you know. So you got this Moss Point. And my dad was like, what's wrong with you? I said, I should have won by a landslide. And he said, you know you're not cute no more. You know you're not cute no more. You need to start preparing yourself for that. And then he walked out the door. So those are the two stories that I carry forward.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Scared the hell out of me, but he put everything in me. Can you see it?
Please, go ahead, because that's a wonderful character-building story. So you also talked about this. We discussed a little bit, but why is it that you went into the field that you did? And that history is so important to you to share.
Yeah, I was trying to find my place. You know, obviously I'm a storyteller. You know, a colleague of mine, she was my neighbor. She's now an endowed professor at USC Law School. And she tells me the story of her mother, who was present as her brother and me. We were going off to Boise State. And she said, Eddie, I've never told you this story, but my mom said this, that as you were getting on the bus, one of the parents said, the problem with that boy is that he doesn't know his place. And she, as ugly as that is, she was right. I never have. But it's layered. So history becomes the way for me to get to that. And then there's grace. The grace is Cornell West. Cornell West saw me giving a talk at a graduate student conference. And he said, well, I want you to come to Princeton, and I'm teaching this class. And then after I visited the class, we went to lunch, or went to dinner. And he says, I want you to come study with me. And then, sitting at his feet, I learned how to think historically. And I learned what it meant to be on fire with the love of black people.
Excellent. So those are our two questions. We're now opening it up. And if you can just raise your hand. There's one in the back right here.
Yes, sir. I'm so nervous. Can y'all tell? I'm so nervous.
Good evening.
Good evening, Doc.
I enjoy seeing you on television. I really do. I look forward to that. And I'm really proud that I found out you was a Mississippian. I say, doggone it. That's super. I found out looking TV. I do have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
And for the mainstream media. You know, I am a grandson. My grandfather was a slave. Not my great-great-grandfather. My dad's dad was a slave, born in 1848, South Carolina. And then they moved to Mississippi later. I don't know if they're going forward or backwards. But the question is, there's very little conversation concerning reparation for a foundation of black Americans. There's little conversation. We're talking about the ghosts of the past. The ghost of the past is the ghost of the present. Yeah, we have not, it's like Martin Luther King talking about that count, we haven't paid yet that blank check, not no blank check, that bad check. Mm-hmm. We have not, that check has not been cashed yet. We have not been afforded that opportunity. There's other areas, so many people receive reparation. Indians, of course they deserve it. There have been Asians received it, Japanese.
I got you.
Yeah, you got the point.
I got you, Doc. And you forgot to mention your name. You better follow instructions.
Thank you, sir.
What's your name, Doc?
What's that now?
Your name.
My name is Louis Liddell. I'm a professor, I'm an educator of 54 years. I'm a veteran of the Jackson Civil Rights Movement.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you. So I think the reparations discussion is a very complex one in the United States, right? Because many of us think that reparations is just simply writing a check to black people who are descendants of slaves. When in fact, reparations can take the form of a wide range of policies aimed at addressing substantively policies that have produced inequality. And remember, reparations is also sequential. First, you got to tell the truth, which is the basis of reconciliation, which sets the conditions for repair. So if you're not telling the truth, there's no basis for reconciliation, and there's no will for repair. So what we have to do is to tell the truth about what we have done. Racial inequality in this country didn't just happen. Mississippi doesn't look the way it looks because people tripped. Right? This is the result of deliberate policy. So, once we admit that, we have to be just as deliberate in our effort to dismantle it as we were in our efforts to create it. And that's where the reparations debate, for me, takes root, right? Takes root. It's not about just simply writing a check. It's about policies that will fundamentally reorient how we live together, if that makes sense, by addressing deliberate policies that disadvantage certain people and advantage others.
We have one question up front.
You can use my mic. You sure? There you go.
Hi, my name is Keena
You
Graham.
need to stand up, please.
No, you keep yours. I'll keep mine back.
My name is Keena Graham. My question has to do with identity. I think that a lot of people of color understand that when we say race, we mean culture. And so many times I'll hear apologists say that there's no such thing as race, that 99% blah, 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 we're all the same people. And it's like, sometimes when I hear people say that, I go, you do understand we mean culture. And I wonder if it would be interesting if white people would have to identify what they mean and define what whiteness means to them the way that people of color have to define what blackness means to us, or what Japanese means to them, or what Choctaw means to Choctaw people, that if they really had to sit down and say, this is what whiteness means to what whiteness means to me, if that would get to the root of some of the issues that we have in our country.
Thank you. I mean, I think thank you for the question. The question kind of goes to the transparency of whiteness, that everyone has to account for themselves. White Americans do not have to account for who they are. And Baldwin described this as the price of the ticket. Right? So the price of the ticket is that the particularity of your European ancestry gets lost as you cross over, not through necessarily Ellis Island, but you cross over and you just become white, right? And particularly in relation to other folks. So the idea that whiteness has to account for itself, right, is a complicated. Because oftentimes when we account for whiteness, it's usually the absence of difference. Well, whiteness isn't NASCAR, is it? Whiteness isn't country music, really? Soul food ain't just ours. I mean, there's some different tasting collard greens on that side of it. Right? Y'all got that pumpkin pie, and we got sweet potato pie. But there's some overlap, right? You see what I mean? So part of what it means to try to articulate what whiteness is, right, often involves kind of interrogating the way in which advantage and disadvantage is reproduced. So part of what I think we have to do, remember I said by quoting Ellison that America has yet to be discovered. Maybe the issue is not so much forcing whiteness to give an account of itself as an ethnicity, but rather voicing a different meaning of what American is, right? So I haven't quite worked that out yet, but it's at the heart of the new book.
And that's a preview. We have one more. Oh, we have several. Okay. And I'm getting the direction of one. So,
Lord heavens, but can we be democratic and give, because I want to miss everything. Can we get two?
okay.
Two?
I'm going to let you pick.
See, that's nasty. We go here and then over here. No, we're going to have to, see, I'm picking, we got three. Yes, and I'll be real quick, yes. But you got to be quick.
All right, I'm pretty quick. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Floyd Council. I'm honored to serve as the executive director of the Jackson Hines Library System.
Go ahead.
And my question is pretty quick, but it might be a little deep. You're talking about, in historical context, nothing new. So my question is, what are your thoughts on neoliberalism in historical context on the current CRT and library book bans in schools and public libraries?
Right. I got that one. That's a dope question. So look, neoliberalism is an ideology, an economic philosophy that carries with it a political rationality. What do I mean by that? For the last 40 years, we have been transformed from citizens in community with each other to self-interested persons in competition and rivalry with each other in pursuit of our own selfish aims and ends. The mask debate is an example of this, right? Very difficult to imagine a sense of obligation to our fellows because we're all kind of locked in our individual silos, pursuing our own selfish ends. The debates around CRT and 1619 Project, for example, and the book banning, have everything to do with this kind of real-time betrayal that I mentioned. But it's linked to the Great Replacement. What do I mean? Remember January 6th? Stop. Right, at the heart of that were fears of being demographically displaced. Remember Charlottesville? You will not replace us, Jews will not replace us? Tucker Carlson on Fox? I don't watch that, but I know some of you might. Right? The Great Replacement, that the demographic shifts, the browning of America means the dismissal, the displacement of white Americans. Well, that fear of replacement joins with historiographic displacement. That part of the demographic shift means we're going to tell a story of the country that not only decenters white men, white cisgendered men, but will dismiss them. So these things go in tandem. They're intimately connected. And all of it is a part of January 6th, voter suppression, CRT, all of it is a continuous part of a response to a moment where it seemed as if the nation was on the cusp of reimagining itself. So that's the short answer. Okay, right here. We got a sister. We got to go to a sister first. Let's go to a sister. Y'all being patient. Is this nice? Is this okay? Thank y'all. We're going to be democratic. We're going to be quick because, you know, as in churches, people got to pay for the lights now. Come on.
I'm Brenda Willis with the Jackson Advocate newspaper, the oldest black newspaper in the state.
Yes!
And I want you to address about the wealth gap in Mississippi. My daddy only gave me one piece of advice about finances, and that was when you go to the bank, be over at the table, at the desk, because that's where the real money is talked about.
Well, you know, I really wish I could say something specific about Mississippi with regards to the wealth gap, but I don't know that data. And let me just be very, very clear here. Oftentimes when you get these kind of microphones and these platforms, there is this presumption that you can talk on everything, right? That you have the answer to everything. I'm so willing to admit when I'm ignorant. So I don't know the particulars, but I have an instinct, right? And an instinct of mine is that if we're less preoccupied with acquiring material toys and more preoccupied with ensuring that our babies don't have to hustle like we do, then maybe we might. But that isn't an issue that is just simply ours. That's an American issue, broadly. Yes. Do we have one more? Is that it? All right. There you go, Doc.
Ron Silver, My question, what you said about truth and reconciliation, it really mirrored a conversation I had with Brother Hollis Watkins about 10 years ago. And what you said about January 6th and the Great Replacement. My question to you is, that to me is a description of almost like mass hysteria going on in our country right now. It's like there's a huge tantrum happening. And so my question is, what is your suggestion of the kind of water we can throw on ourselves to like shake us out of it? How do we get out of this mass hysteria that we're in? Because that's what it feels like to me.
So there's a chapter in the new book entitled American Madness, literary conception of madness, right? And it's what does it mean to tell oneself a lie since one's inception? And what does it mean to have to live amid that lie? So what else is double consciousness but a form of madness? So what has it wrought? You see? So what do we do is the question. I have no idea. No, what we need to do is it's in the going towards. Each of us, we might not be poets like Natasha Trethewey, but each of us can bear witness. What we have to do in the midst of this moment is tell the truth. And let me say this really quickly. Is this okay, Reena? I'll say this really quickly. I've been saying this all day since I saw the door that Emmett Till opened. And the echo of the door of no return. Because when that baby walked through that door, he wasn't coming back out. Right? And I was thinking about the intimacy of our hatreds, talking to certain folks, okay. The intimacy of our hatreds. People knew who put that fan around that baby's neck and threw him in the Tallahatchie River. They drank beer with him. They played cards with him. They broke bread with them. They loved them. People know who killed those police officers and attacked those police officers on January 6th. They're your uncles and aunts and your brothers and sisters and your fathers and mothers. Y'all know what y'all hear around the table on Thanksgiving. We're not there because we're so separated. But the intimacy of our hatreds. If we're going to tell the truth, if we're going to bear witness, we have to bear witness to the people we love who are spouting this nonsense. It's in the going towards that salvation can be found. Tell the truth. Bear witness.
Dr. Eddie Glaude Jr. And I know Katie is going to bring us home, but you have mentioned twice about a new chapter in a new book, and I can't leave this stage without you telling us when.
Only the Lord knows. I'm still writing it. Only the Lord knows. Did we walk down? Oh, they want us to sit there.
In a second. Did y'all know you were going to church tonight?
Yes. Wonderful. Oh, my God.
Mr. Meredith, Governor Musgrove, Congressman Espy, all of you, thank you so much for being here tonight. Reena, thank you so much for participating. Kellogg Foundation for sponsoring. Dr. Eddie Glaude, it was an amazing experience. Thank you so much. We have sold out of books. If you have a book, and if he is willing, Dr. Glaude will sign them quickly. If you would like a book, we will take your order, and we will see if he will sign them after tonight and get them back to you. Thank you so much for coming.